Cardinal Kin, a Batfam Podfic written by the Royal Librarian and read by Heo Stories. Art is also by the Royal Librarian. Chapter 3, A Warning. Tim practically throws himself down onto his couch, heaving a heavy sigh. Tonight was something. He wasn't looking forward to the gala in the first place. He rarely does, but with so many of the Waynes there, it was just that much more unbearable. Tim does his utmost to avoid Waynes at all costs. They're often in the same spaces, but Tim is careful to maintain a distance. Even after all these years, seeing his former family, it's like a dagger to his spleen. If anything, the pain of it seems to be getting worse with time. He just. He misses them. And then Lucius had to introduce him to his own brother, Damien, no less. Tim smiled softly, thinking about that interaction. Tim did everything he could to treat Damien as he would if Fox had introduced any other prominent child, with patience and a touch of provocation. Damien has never been particularly good at the whole grin and bear it for the public perception thing. Tim was fully prepared to be on the bad side of one of Damien's famous verbal lashings when he called him by the wrong name. But he didn't. Damien held himself back, corrected Tim calmly, and moved on, even though Tim is sure he knew he did it on purpose. Tim smirks, sitting up to start undoing his tie. You can't help but be proud of him. They spoke for only a few minutes, hidden behind the guise of their images and reputations. Tim with the added mask of indifference and unfamiliarity. Yet the conversation felt like a balm to his soul. For as much anxiety as it gave him, which was a lot because what the hell, Fox? He got to spend a few minutes with his brother. He got to actually see him in the flesh, not just through a camera or security footage. Because Tim is just as much of a stalker now as he always was. He got to talk to Damien. Even with the mask he had to wear, Tim got to ask questions he was genuinely curious about. Damien wants to go into the business. It isn't surprising, all things considered. Damien was always adamant about continuing Bruce's legacy, both as Batman and as a Wayne. Before Tim jumped back, B had just started planning how to teach him. He even asked Tim to help. Had things gone to plan, Tim and Damien would have been forced to spend a lot of time together as he walked Damien through the ropes. Back then, he had hoped that time would endear him to Damien a bit more. That maybe they could be better friends, better brothers. Tim sighs. Life is a bitch like that. It makes sense that Fox would introduce them. Damien knows he's tutoring Damien on the side, but not as often as either would like. Tim is an easy connection for Damien to make. They're of a similar age and situation, plus Lucius already knows Tim pretty well, better than most people anyway. He knows that Tim would never purposefully humiliate Damien. Ever since Tim hired Tam Fox as his executive assistant, Lucius doesn't believe what the media has to say about him. Tim tells her father enough for Fox to understand most of the image Tim presents is a false one. Tam doesn't know much about his work outside. He's careful about that, but she knows his true personality and sees how much effort he puts into the company and into Gotham. It isn't exactly something he can avoid, even if he'd like to. He needs Tam as much in this life as he did in the last. He has too much to juggle mentally to run an entire business by himself without help. But if a few people need to actually know him it all, he's glad Tam is one of them. The downside of it, though, is that Lucius doesn't buy into Tim's bullshit anymore. Tam has ranted enough about him to her father for him to see through the act. Having Lucius as an ally has its pros and cons. On one hand, having the CEO of WE trust him makes his life so much easier. They work together seamlessly, and Tim doesn't have to dance around his Timothy Drake act to actually accomplish something. On the other hand, Lucius thinks he can get away with a lot more than anyone else would even try with him. He knows Tim can be vicious when the time calls for it, but only if it's truly warranted, or if Tim is trying to prove a point. Otherwise, well, Tim can be a bit of a pushover. Well, that isn't entirely true. Tim stands his ground on most things, but when it comes to interacting with people from his old life, Fox included, he can't help but want to please. When it comes to the people Tim cares about, he's pretty malleable. Of course, Fox doesn't know that, but he doesn't need to. Tim goes up to his room and gets undressed, trading his suit for a set of comfortable black pajamas. He can't quite stand the cold feeling of the marble tiles on his bare feet, so he also dons a pair of slip-on house shoes that look a bit like boots but feel more like slippers. He silently navigates back downstairs and into the manor library. He pulls out three different books from the shelf to unlock the mechanism in the wall, and then swings the bookcase out to get into his safe room. His parents had this room installed years ago to hide away their most precious artifacts. After their deaths, Tim repurposed it for his needs. The far wall is completely dedicated to his computer and surveillance system, packed with screens from edge to edge. Various weapons line the walls. He has a small map bay set up with everything he needs to treat himself in an emergency. His cardinal suit is hung up in another hidden cubby, along with his case files, camera equipment, and photographs. He doesn't go out much anymore to take photos of the bats. It's too risky, but occasionally he needs a distraction. The photos are one of his few direct connections to the bats. He loves and hates it with equal measure for how much sentiment and pain they give him. Tim spends the next 3 hours working through an old case. Things have changed so much through his intervention in the timeline that Tim doesn't have the edge he used to in terms of information. Plus, he's over a year older now than he was when he first came back. That isn't to say Tim isn't up to date though. He's fastidious about keeping up with every player in the game. These days, he has a lot less to worry about with how many criminals he's assisted putting away before they could complete their truly horrific crimes. When Tim solves a case or has a new lead, he usually sends the information off to either Oracle or Gordon. He doesn't go out as Cardinal often. He doesn't like to be seen, and he knows the bats would track him down if they could. They have a symbiotic relationship, but Tim is under no delusions that they'd unmask him at the first opportunity. After solving the case, the mistress did it? Really? So unoriginal. Tim shuts down his systems and makes his way back into the main house. He's barely 3 steps out of the library when he senses someone else in the house, watching him. If it were just a common criminal or thief, Tim would let him be. He has a cover to maintain after all, but this person is too quiet. The presence unnaturally still. That means a leak training. Tim keeps his steps even and his breath steady, giving no inclination he's aware of the intruder. The mansion is dark, but Tim navigates the twists and turns of the mausoleum with ease, nimbly plucking 2 hidden daggers out of a pot plant without missing a step. Tim heads to a mostly empty room, devoid of almost any furniture, and just barely lit by the moonlight flooding through the large windows. As he feels the intruder closing in, Tim turns into the room and suddenly pivots to attack them, head on. The intruder catches the incoming dagger as if they were expecting it. Tim yanks at his arm out of their grasp, spinning to face them. They trade blows, neither gaining the upper hand, both moving quickly, dodging and countering. But as they exchange strikes, Tim realizes he's recognized the form, the fluidity, the precision. The invader flips, using the momentum to place a well-timed kick to his midriff, what catching Tim off guard and sending him stumbling backward. He recovers, but the force drives him down to one knee. His breath hisses between clenched teeth as he raises his head in slight shock. He knows that move. The intruder steps forward, ready to press the attack, but Tim's instincts kick in. He ducks under the next swing, slipping up behind them in a blur of motion. In one swift movement, he's on the other side of the hall, flipping the lights on and flooding the room with light. The figure is dressed in all black, a scarf draped over their face, but Tim would know those eyes anywhere. Surprise! He doesn't even need to see her face to know Prue is smirking smugly. Tim lets out a breath. God damn it, Prue. Prue unravels the scarf, allowing it to drape over his shoulder. Yep, smug as hell. Got to make sure you're keeping your skills sharp, Red. Tim rolls his eyes. My skills are fine, he huffs, already leaving to hide his daggers back where they belong. He heads towards the kitchen without looking back, knowing Prue will follow. Prue tsk. Well, you could be better, you know? You don't practice enough. Are you here for any other reason other than to critique my abilities? Yes, actually. Prue sits herself at one of the bar counter stools, while Timmy busies himself with getting them both something to drink. Meeting and befriending Prue again in this timeline was a happy accident. When he left on his year-long expedition, one of his last missions was taking out the Council of Spiders again. The timing was almost identical to when he took it down the first time, so it wasn't entirely surprising that the League of Assassins was already on the case. Tim planned to avoid him completely, but the team got caught up in an explosion. Owen and Say still died, but Prue was alive. Barely. Tim couldn't just let her die. He saved Prue's life and got her to safety. Her injuries weren't too bad, but she had a bad concussion that took her out for a few days. When she awoke, Tim greeted her only as Cardinal, his face masked and voice modulated. He told her of his plans to take out the council and offered to allow her to join and complete her mission. Prue reluctantly agreed. The mission was as rough and difficult as it was the first time, but a bit easier since Tim was prepared for it. By the time they dismantled the council, Prue and Tim had saved each other many times over and developed a certain level of trust. Prue was still suspicious of him, though, specifically of his uncanny ability to predict the sudden obstacles thrown their way. They parted ways amicably enough, and Tim returned to Gotham. But within the month, Prue managed to track him down. The real him. Tim still has no idea how she found him, how she discovered his identity, and to this day she refused to share. She showed up to Drake Manor almost exactly as she did tonight, and cornered him, demanding to know who he was, what his intentions were, and how exactly he knew so much. Tim attempted to lie at first, but Prue can always tell. The only way to convince her he wasn't a threat was to be honest. He came clean. Completely clean. He told her about the other timeline, his role in the other universe, and the mission where they met. He told her of his new self-imposed role as protector of Gotham and, unofficially, the Batman and the other members of his former family. Seeing his honesty and vulnerability, Prue confided in him in turn. Although she is still technically a League member, she's not loyal to Ra's al Ghul, but to his daughter Talia, and to bringing the League into a new era. Tim was surprised. He had no idea how his actions in this reality led to her making such a drastic change. Though, when he thought about it, it wasn't all that unpredictable. Prue was still the same person she had always been, the friend who had helped him at his lowest point, even turning on Ra's al Ghul to do it. Whatever the catalyst, Prue would never have served him indefinitely. After completing that mission, Prue reported straight back to Talia, since Raz and the rest of the League still believed her dead. Being dead made Prue invaluable to Talia. It allowed her to send Prue to Gotham with the most important of tasks: protect Damien. Sending Damien away when Talia did was a risk, although Talia convinced her father to let Damien complete his training at his father's side. She holds no delusions that will last. Raz will eventually come to Damien to instate him as his heir, or worse, possess his body forever. Prue watched over Damien from a distance for a time, but once she realized how adamant Tim was about protecting Damien and the others himself, she saw her presence in Gotham as superfluous. She returned to Talia and informed her that her son was already well and soundly watched over by Cardinal, the very same person who had warned Talia of the danger Damien was in to begin with. Prue honored that trust and did not reveal Cardinal's true name, signing that she could remain loyal to both, as they were both seeking the same goal: the downfall of Raz and the safety of Damien. Talia was not happy, but accepted Cardinal's protection of her son with a few conditions, one of which was that Damien would have direct access to Cardinal's protection in an emergency. And so, Tim crafted an emergency beacon, similar to the bat's own distress signal, and instructed Prue to give it to Damien. Recognizing Prue as one of his mother's loyalists, Damien accepted the beacon and has carried it with him ever since. He doesn't know who the beacon calls to, though he probably suspects Prue or one of his mother's soldiers. But he knows that if all else fails, he can call for help. Prue still visits a few times a year to check in with both him and Damien, never informing the boy who his true protector is. Prue is the only one in this entire timeline who knows Tim's true past. She's the closest thing he has to a confidant, and more than that, she's probably his closest friend. He's told her countless times that she should call him Tim, but she just rolls her eyes and insists on calling him Red or Lil Red affectionately. She reminds him a bit of Jason in a lot of ways. Prue accepts a glass of water from Tim and sips it slowly, staring into its depths intently. Well, Tim probes when she doesn't go on. It's Ross, she sighs. He's on the move. Talia says he's left Nanda Prabha, but we don't know where he's gone or why. Tim hums. It could mean a lot of things, both unimportant and paramount. Sometimes Ross likes to switch up his headquarters temporarily or even just check in with his other bases, usually ones hosting Lazarus bits. If it was something so benign, however, there's no reason Talia wouldn't have been informed. That means Ross is either hiding something or going off the books, both potentially problematic. If he has uncovered Talia's treachery, it could mean war. Ra's loyalists versus Talia's, a battle for the throne of the demon. Both of the All Ghouls don't usually operate that way, though. They specialize in working in the shadows. The true battle between them is one of wits. Who will be able to outsmart the other? Talia has been working for years, slowly and surely gaining loyalty throughout the League. When she first accepted Cardinal as her son's protector, she insisted he prove he was truly opposed to Raz, that he would protect Damien from him at all costs. Tim had no issues with the request and actually proposed a plan he had intended to complete anyway, reenacting the same plan he had executed before. Cardinal and Prue went around the world to every recorded Lazarus bit and set explosives at each. If Raz were to move against Talia unexpectedly, She could set them off in an instant. Unbeknownst to Talia, Tim still has access to the bombs. He has the power to shut down or initiate the sequence if he deems it necessary. He isn't sure if or when he'll go head to head with Raz again, but he knows better than to do so without leverage. Tim favors Talia over Raz any day, but he knows Talia's character. She's just as power hungry and cunning as Raz is, and that level of determination is not to be taken lightly. Tim is prepared if her ambition proves to a detriment to Gotham or the Bats. He's been lucky to avoid Ra's attention altogether this time around. There are whispers in the underground about Cardinal. Tim isn't naive enough to think he's gone completely unnoticed, but he's confident his identity is secure. If Talia can take out that creepy bastard without Tim ever having to go up against him again, well, he's all for it. But for that to be possible, they need to know his doings to determine what he knows. Talia is sending you underground, isn't she? Tim states more than asks. You're going to track him down. Prue shrugs. I'm one of the few who can, and he won't expect me. We're sitting on the edge of a knife here. We can't be taken by surprise. We must be ready if he makes a move. Tim nods slowly. He doesn't like it, but he understands it. It's dangerous, though. Those who stand up to Ross rarely survive the ordeal, but if Prue's caught, Tim mentally shakes himself. It's not in his control. What do you need from me? Nothing more than the usual, really. Keep a vigilant eye on the prince. The demon may think now is the time to take him, and if so, I doubt he would tell Talia, whether or not he knew of her betrayal. Talia has been able to pacify father over the years, but Raz has never taken his eye off of Damien. He agreed to Talia's terms only until Damien was fully trained, a deadline that may soon be approaching depending on Raz's observations. You know how Raz operates, right? Prue continues. You may know better than anyone other than Talia herself. He won't come from him unless he's sure Damien is ready. Tim nods, but internally knows he isn't entirely true. If Raz had an inkling of Damien's true loyalties, Tim is sure, isn't sure he would be so patient. Prue rolls out her shoulders, stretching out a kink in her neck. Over lucky, this whole thing is just a big misunderstanding, and Raz just wanted a vacation. She mutters blithely. Tim raised an eyebrow. When are we ever lucky? Prue snorts, finishing her glass and rising to her feet. She rounds around the kitchen island and stands before Tim, reaching out a hand to ruffle his hair. Be careful, little rat, she says softly. If something does happen, I'll be out of reach. You won't be able to contact me. Tim frowns. What about Talia? Prue shakes her head, her gaze low. I'm not sure. So Tim is on his own if shit hits the fan. Wonderful. Prue smirks, almost like she's reading his thoughts. You'll be fine, and if you can always ask the Bats for help if you need it. Tim outright scoffs at that. Yeah, right. Prue huffs. Fair enough. Her face sombers as she checks the time. I need to go. Prue takes the scarf and wraps it around her bald head again, covering everything but the slits of her eyes. Look out for yourself, Rep. Tim nods once, masking the trepidation he feels rising in his gut. You too. She turns and meets Tim's eye, giving him one final stern glance. Protect him. The next second, Prue is lost to the depths of the shadows. Tim stays where he is long after she's gone, laying out a deep sigh that echoes through the empty halls. Always, he whispers to the dark. And that's chapter 3 done. Um, they the Royal Librarian also did a piece of fan art for this chapter. You can find it at the end of the chapter if you want to look at it. Yeah, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Till next chapter. Bye.